This is Rainy Night Horrors. Outside, the storm brews, and with it comes something darker. Every drop masks a sound, every shadow holds a shape. You're not imagining it. You're hearing the truth. Listen closely. It's already here. Some intuition, sharp and unwelcome, should have warned me about Eliza and that specific room. In the 3 months my visits had traced paths through her apartment, not once had her trajectory included crossing its threshold. She orbited it, a planet avoiding a dead star. When my own boxes joined hers last week, transforming visitor to resident, I finally voiced the question. A shrug, a murmur, storage. But repositories hold things, relics, junk, forgotten histories. This one held only vacancy. The first night passed, undisturbed. Silence reigned the second. It was the third night, mid-conference call, that my phone abruptly surrendered its charge. Eliza slept, a landscape I dared not disturb, rummaging for my lifeline, the charger. An image surfaced, an outlet glimpsed earlier, stark against a bare wall in that shunned space, seen while navigating the cardboard labyrinth of my move. No groan of hinges betrayed my entry. The air within struck instantly colder, a palpable 10-degree drop from the hallway's mild breath. My phone's dying eye cast a weak beam. Barren walls, floorboards filmed with gray dust, no hint of furniture. Only the electrical socket on the far wall broke the monotony. And the floor. The floor. Amidst the uniform dust lay a perfect disk of cleanliness, perhaps 3 feet across, unnaturally sharp-edged. I knelt, plugged the phone in, watched the reassuring glow of the charging icon bloom on the dark screen. Sufficient. I left it resting there. 3 a.m. wrenched me from sleep, bladder insistent. The path to relief lay past that door. Darkness cloaked the corridor, save for a curious, rhythmic pulsing beneath the forbidden door. My phone screen? No. The cadence felt wrong, erratic, like a failing heart. Then sound, a delicate percussion from within. Tap, tap, tap. Fingernails on wood, perhaps, but languid, deliberate. Boxer-clad, feet suddenly welded to the cool floorboards. I listened. The tapping ceased. A whisper began, seeping through the gap under the door. Not language, precisely, but the muffled cadence of speech, strained through unseen layers. My mouth turned to parchment. Morning required that phone. Work demanded connection. The susurrus persisted, an unsettling tide rising and falling. My hand closed around the doorknob, the metal bit with glacial cold. As I twisted, the whispering choked into absolute silence. I pushed the door inward. My phone lay inert where I'd placed it, screen black, the charging indicator pulsing its steady, mechanical rhythm. The room yawned, empty, but the clean circle etched in the dust. It had expanded. 4 feet wide now, easily. I snatched the phone, ripped the charger from the socket with trembling fingers that nearly fumbled the prize. A frantic dash to the bathroom, then refuge sought back in bed beside Eliza's oblivious form. Until dawn bled through the blinds, I lay rigid, straining against the silence. Work the next day was a fog of unfocused anxiety, neck muscles screaming from the night's tension. Lunch break brought a texted inquiry to Eliza. "Hey, What's the story with the empty room? Old tenant clear out fast? An hour crawled by before her reply materialized. Don't really use it. Better that way. Better that way? The phrase lodged itself, sharp and unsettling. My call went straight to her voicemail's indifferent greeting. Evening found me alone. Eliza worked late. Pizza arrived, consumed on the sofa, my gaze deliberately averted from the hallway's shadowed length. 10 o'clock. The familiar rattle of Eliza's key in the lock, but preceding her entrance, that sound again. Tap, 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 emanating unmistakably from the vacant room. Eliza entered, weariness etched onto her face. The tapping stopped cold. A brief kiss to my cheek, and she headed for the sanctuary of the shower. I followed. Eliza, that room. We need to discuss it. The rush of water began. What about it? Her voice, slightly muffled. Last night, I pressed. I heard things. In there. And just now. Again. A pause. Waited. You went inside? To charge my phone, yeah. That's not the issue. Though something... Don't! She cut in sharply, the water drumming. Don't charge things in there. Just stay out of it, Leo. Okay? She vanished behind the shower curtain before words could form in my throat. Sleep was a shallow pretense. Beside me, Eliza breathed the even rhythm of the deeply unconscious. The bedside clock glared 2:47 a.m. when the whispers resumed, insidious tendrils weaving through the quiet. Eliza remained undisturbed. How could this sound not penetrate her slumber? The whispers intensified, coalescing, almost forming comprehensible syllables. Almost. At precisely 3 a.m., a resonant thud echoed from the room, the impact of something substantial meeting the floor. Eliza shot upright, eyes wide in the gloom. Did you hear that? Yes, I whispered back. Her hand clamped onto my arm, frigid, trembling. Leo, don't. Please don't go look. Another thud, then another. Footfalls, ponderous and heavy, impossibly so for anything human. The apartment itself seemed to thrum with each impact. What in God's name is happening? I flung back the covers. Leo, no. Her grip tightened, trying to anchor me, but I pulled free. Silence fell the moment I reached the hallway. The door stood closed, yet an unnatural blue light pulsed around its frame, flickering like faulty neon. The whispers had deepened into a low, continuous moan. My hand reached for the knob. Behind me, Eliza screamed, "Don't!" Futile. The door swung open. Vacancy had fled. The clean circle in the dust had swallowed the entire floor, and occupying the center, a figure stood, impossibly tall, thin, its limbs stretched into nightmarish proportions, head grazing the ceiling, skin, pale and smooth like polished bone, stretched taut over a skull-like form devoid of features. Its arms, grotesquely long, dangled past its knees, fingertips trailing delicately across the floorboards. Ripples of that same eerie blue light undulated across its surface. As paralysis held me captive, it began a slow, deliberate turn of its head towards me. Where eyes should have been, only deep, fathomless black hollows resided. I slammed the door, the sound cracking through the apartment, and fled. Eliza was already scrambling, keys and phone in hand. We spent the remainder of the night huddled in the cramped confines of her car, parked under the jaundiced glow of a 24-hour diner's sign. How long? The question finally broke the silence as dawn painted the sky in bruised colors. How long has it been in there? Eliza stared fixedly through the windshield. Since I moved in. 2 years. Landlord mentioned the room was part of the deal. Couldn't alter it. Not even paint. A brittle laugh escaped her. Rent was a steal. Now I understand the discount. Why didn't you warn me? Honestly, would you have believed it? Would you be living here now if I had? The unspoken answer hung heavy between us. No. It never came out, she continued, voice flat. Always stayed put, until you brought power to it. The phone charging. Maybe that fed it somehow? I don't know. That morning, we retreated to her parents' house. Movers were summoned, instructed to pack everything except the contents, or lack thereof, of that one specific room. Eliza broke the lease, forfeiting the deposit without a backward glance. Our new place costs significantly more, but each room serves a mundane, comforting purpose. Sometimes, though, in the dead quiet of night, the memory surfaces, not auditory, but visceral. Tap, tap, tap. I find myself wondering about that empty room, its new occupants, and whether their phone batteries ever run low. Eliza refuses to speak of it. The old lease, the address, she disposed of them like contaminated waste. Yet last week, I saw her swiftly delete a text from her former landlord. 4 stark words. The room misses you. I purged my contact details from the moving company's records, changed my email, switched mobile providers. No loose ends. Because occasionally, late at night, my phone screen will flicker with that familiar, unsettling blue luminescence. And in those moments, I could swear the whispers return, swelling, almost resolving into words I desperately do not want to comprehend. Some thresholds are best left uncrossed. Some vacancies should remain absolute. And some messages, regardless of their persistence, demand only silence. Last night, my new phone died. Just like that. Full battery 1 second, lifeless black screen the next. And in the profound darkness of our new bedroom, I heard it. Faint, almost subliminal, but utterly unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. I discarded the phone this morning. Eliza didn't question the act. She simply produced a cheap, antiquated flip phone, purchased weeks ago as a contingency. No tracking, no web, no smart features. Harder to trace, she stated quietly. Harder for what to trace? The question died on my lips. Deep down, the answer was already known. That space wasn't merely a room. It was a conduit, and the entity that passed through is still searching. Now, rituals govern my nights, checking closets, peering behind shower curtains, scanning beneath the bed. Logic whispers paranoia. Then the image returns, those vacant hollows, the taut skin, the fingers dragging across the floor. Eliza sleeps bathed in lamplight. I understand. Neither of us acknowledges the strange lacuna in our memories, the inability to recall the precise number of our old apartment, the street name fading like an old photograph. Only the room remains vivid, the figure, the chilling blue glow. Sometimes 3 a.m. finds me awake, rigid, convinced the whispers emanate from our new closet. Always phantom echoes, tricks of a traumatized mind. We are safe. I repeat the mantra. We moved cities, scrubbed our digital footprints, left no breadcrumbs. Yesterday, however, our new mailbox yielded a small, plain piece of paper, blank, but for a single marking, a perfect circle rendered in fine gray dust. I incinerated it instantly, saying nothing to Eliza, but later, lying in the dark, feigning sleep beside her equally counterfeit slumber, I heard her breathe a barely audible whisper. It knows where we are. I feigned ignorance, pretended not to hear her rise, and methodically checked the locks again, pretended not to glimpse her deleting another text from an unknown sender. But her certainty resonates within me, because this morning, glancing in the bathroom mirror, a flicker in my peripheral vision, something tall and thin reflected behind me, faceless, patient. I didn't turn. Sometimes deliberate blindness is the only shield against madness. We are moving again next week. No forwarding address, no smartphones, no digital ghosts. We understand now. In this hyper-connected world, certain disconnections are vital. Certain doors must remain bolted. Certain rooms must remain void. But as sleep hesitates and shadows lengthen, a cold dread persists. Does distance even matter? Is anywhere truly beyond its reach? Because in the liminal space between wakefulness and oblivion, I still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And it sounds closer than before. It began, as these intrusions often do, unobtrusively. A Thursday. Morning light, thin and sour, failed to penetrate the subterranean depths where Elias hunched over brittle enrollment ledges in a constricted basement corridor. He'd descended merely to exhume details for some looming report. The department's digital memory began abruptly in 2005, condemning inquiries into earlier eras to these musty catacombs. Silence, usually absolute save for the electric thrum of the fluorescent tubes, was fractured. A faint susurrus, intimate as breath upon the earlobe, prickled the skin at his nape. He pivoted, nothing but the endless receding lines of steel shelving under the stuttering glare of the bulbs. A shrug, a dismissal. Thus, the haunting commenced. For 3 circuits of the seasons, Elias had navigated the currents of this institution, managing administrative eddies and charting the flow of research materials for the faculty. Above ground, life pulsed. Students surged through hallways. Staff exchanged pleasantries near humming elevators. A constant kinetic energy vibrated in the air. Below, however, in the sub-basement strata, stagnation reigned. It was a repository for the obsolete. Archival texts, forgotten files, dormant equipment. Light struggled here, pallid and insufficient. Walls wore a uniform, institutional gray. The air hung thick with the scent of decaying paper, occasionally sharpened by the ghost of disinfectant. His initial months rarely necessitated a descent into this undercroft. Then, the demands of archival research increased. Academics sought spectral data from bygone decades, fossilized test scores. Elias grew accustomed to the narrow aisles, the low drone of unseen ventilation systems. He mapped the territory, which shelves guarded the most intact records, which corners cultivated cobwebs and spider husks. The place offered no comfort, only a stark utility, a quiet void for uninterrupted focus. Yet, insidiously, The quiet began to fray. Small aberrations surfaced. A furtive shuffle, perhaps canvas scraping concrete beyond the next rank of shelves. A concise thud, like a heavy volume, closed decisively. Always, he attributed it to a colleague foraging in the stacks. "Hello?" He'd call into the indifferent air. "Need a hand finding something?" Silence answered. Investigation revealed only emptiness. The building's ancient metabolism, he reasoned. Old structures sighed and settled in peculiar ways. He actively suppressed acknowledgement, but the incidents multiplied, eroding his rationalizations. Once, while immersed in a dense folio of transcripts from the 90s, the corridor light above executed its familiar, nervous flicker. Simultaneously, a peripheral smear of motion, low to the ground on his left, a shadow, gliding where no object cast one. His gaze snapped towards it. The floor remained bare, dusty. A sudden, inexplicable cold settled on his forearms, the ambient temperature seemingly plummeting. His heart gave a startled leap. Just tricks of the dim light, he chided himself. Mere optical static. A week later, his name, or rather, its phantom echo, drawn out, incomplete, breathed into the stagnant air. Eli, he spun, a jolt electrifying his spine. Barren aisles stretched away. He prowled the corridor, peered behind a looming metal cabinet. Nothing. A clammy dew slicked his palms. His chest felt constricted. Explanations scrabbled in his mind. A prank by unseen staff. But the stealth, the sheer pointlessness, felt wrong. He retreated from the basement that day, a residue of unease clinging to him. Sleep offered little refuge that night, the half-whispered name replaying with maddening fidelity. It was nothing. The mantra repeated until dawn. He immersed himself in the day's routines, filing, emails, printing charts for a professor. Then, around 3, necessity struck. Archaic personnel files beckoned from below. Reluctance coiled in his gut. He retrieved his torch. The basement lights seemed to wane with the afternoon sun. Reaching the sub-basement threshold, he inhaled deeply. In, find it, out. He paced the main corridor, eyes scanning shelf labels. Locating the correct section, he reached for a folder on the uppermost shelf. At that precise moment, the bulb overhead spasmed, plunging the corridor into absolute black for a full, breathless second. And in that vacuum, a warmth, a moist exhalation ghosting his cheek. His heart seized. Light flooded back. He recoiled violently from the shelf, his torch clattering against the concrete. Retrieving it, his hand trembled uncontrollably. Elias wasn't easily unnerved. Late nights spent in other campus edifices had never induced such visceral reaction. But that breath, it possessed a tactile reality, a phantom warmth. His pulse hammered, his throat papyrus dry. A frantic scan revealed empty perspectives in both directions. Only the distant mechanical sigh of the air handlers broke the silence. Forcing himself back to the task, he snatched the required documents, tucked them fiercely under his arm, and strode towards the stairs. The entire egress, an insistent tingling, persisted at the base of his skull. The unnerving certainty of proximity, of being observed. That evening, the urge to confess warred with the certainty of ridicule. Administration, a co-worker. He lacked tangible proof, only sensations, ambiguous sounds, capricious lights. The fear of being branded imaginative, or worse, neglectful, silenced him. Months bled into one another, and the whispers became less exception, more rule. Sometimes a faint, incoherent muttering, as if from just beyond the steel partitions. Other times, a nascent syllable breathed directly behind him, dissolving before comprehension. Each instance prompted a swift, fruitless pivot, torch beam slicing through dusty air, his nerves frayed thin. A sheen of sweat accompanied every descent. He began strategizing avoidance, delaying archival requests with flimsy excuses, hoping inquiries might simply fade. A poor tactic, he knew, anxiety bleeding into professional duty, but each step into that lower level felt like entering a trap. The corridors seemed to contract, the lights dimmer, the air heavier, tinged now with something acrid beneath the paper dust, like damp wool. His breathing grew shallow at the bottom step, muscles tensing, braced for the next flicker, the next breath sound. One morning, half a year after the initial whisper, he registered footsteps, unhurried, distinct, echoing from the far reaches of the basement. "Is someone there?" His voice, thin and tremulous, shamed him. No reply. The tread continued. Compelled, he followed the sound, rounded a corner into a long, straight corridor terminating 50 feet away at a locked storage room. The steps emanated from that direction. He advanced cautiously, his own shoes squeaking accusations on the floor. His hands felt icy, blood pounding a frantic rhythm in his ears. As he neared the storage room door, the footsteps ceased abruptly. He tested the handle, secured. Pressing his ear to the cold metal yielded only silence. Behind him, the corridor lay vacant. The light above flickered twice, then held steady. "Nobody here," he muttered, the words tasting false. The sensation of being watched intensified. He fled, nearly stumbling on the upward stairs. He risked a tentative query with Marco, a colleague, later that day. Vague questions about odd noises. "Just the pipes rattling, probably," Marco offered. "Old building," Elias pushed gently. "Ever feel like someone's whispering or walking around?" Marco's perplexed glance was answer enough. "Nah, man. Stressing out?" Elias let it drop, the label of paranoid hovering unspoken. Weeks later, a consignment of obsolete textbooks demanded his presence, cluttering a corner of the sub-basement. Administration wanted them catalogued or culled. He surrendered a full day to the task, sorting dusty spines into piles. By late afternoon, his back ached, sweat plastered his shirt, his focus blurred by fatigue. Around 4, the familiar sibilance returned, seeming to originate from behind a tall stack of cardboard boxes. He fought to ignore it, hands fumbling slightly with the books. Then, again, sharper this time, coalescing almost into his name. He straightened, knees unsteady, stomach churning. He took a hesitant step towards the boxes. The overhead light pulsed erratically. A dry scrape, like cardboard dragged across concrete. He peered around the stack. Emptiness greeted him. His respiration quickened, vision momentarily swimming. Closing his eyes, he commanded calm. Then, a soft, distinct exhale directly behind his head. He whirled, nearly dropping the tome in his hand. Nothing but a metal shelf laden with dusty, silent volumes. The fragile dam of his composure broke. He bolted from the sub-basement, leaving the books in disarray. Marco saw his pallor upon his return to the main floor. "You okay, Elias? Look like you've seen a ghost." a curt nod, a muttered excuse about needing air. In the restroom, cold water did little to quell the frantic drumming in his chest. Something was fundamentally wrong. That much was undeniable now. He began actively avoiding the basement, inventing increasingly elaborate reasons to delay or delegate retrieval tasks. If forced to descend, he'd attempt to conscript a colleague, but their tolerance for the oppressive atmosphere was invariably brief, leaving him alone once more in the heavy silence. He hasn't reported it. The prospect of articulating whispers and phantom breath in a locked, empty space feels insurmountable, absurd. Part of him craves official investigation, maintenance crews probing for drafts, faulty wiring, hidden speakers, some mundane explanation. Another part dreads the inevitable outcome, an inspection yielding nothing, confirming only his instability in their eyes. So he remains trapped between professional obligation and primal fear. Quitting isn't feasible. Denying the terror is impossible. Rationalizations flicker and die. Ventilation systems, intruders leaving no trace. He contemplates recording audio, seeking objective proof, yet the thought of capturing an undeniable whisper terrifies him more than the uncertainty. Confirmation might shatter the last vestiges of his perceived sanity. For now, the strategy is swiftness. Descend, acquire, ascend. Minimize exposure. Ignore the fleeting shapes at the periphery. Disregard the faltering lights, the sudden gooseflesh. Endure the persistent feeling of presence, the near-audible rasp that sometimes brushes the edge of hearing. A voice struggling for form. Is it calling him? Is it merely an echo? Does it intend harm? The not knowing is a relentless, quiet torture. Each ascent from that subterranean world is a reprieve, breathless and temporary. His legs often feel like unreliable stilts, his shirt damp against his back. He maintains the facade, keeping the experience locked within. When colleagues mention the basement, he offers casual agreement. Creepy, musty, noting how their ascent lacks the sharp edge of his own lived dread. He avoids prolonged solitude down there. If the whisper comes, he feigns deafness. He fights the drift of his thoughts. It's just an old building, bad acoustics, poor lighting. Yet deep within, the conviction holds. Something else resides there. He feels it brush past him in the narrow aisles. He doesn't know how much longer the pretense can hold. The next whisper might finally shatter his silence, send him running upstairs, words tumbling out. Or perhaps it will prompt a final, decisive retreat. Belongings packed, refusal absolute. The decision hangs, suspended. But daily, the tension coils tighter. Sooner or later, something must give. He dreads what happens when it does. The cardiac monitor's rhythmic sigh sliced through the profound quiet of the ward, a lonely metronome, counting the seconds past 2:37 a.m. Mere hours remained tethering me to this shift, this hushed domain. Then I perceived her, a patient form adrift at the hallway's terminus, the thin cotton of her gown stirring as if touched by an unseen current. Yet, no draught penetrated this hermetically sealed wing. This floor lay dormant, shrouded in the dust of renovations for months uncounted. My name is Elara Vance. For half a decade, the nocturnal realm of St. Jude's Infirmary has been my stage. I imagined myself seasoned, inoculated against the strange theater of hospital nights, the frantic ballet of resuscitation, the lunatides pulling at troubled minds, the rare escapee navigating shadowed corridors. Nothing, however, had forged me for the events unfurling in the pre-dawn stillness. The shift commenced under the guise of normalcy. Rounds completed, charges checked. I retreated to the sanctuary of the nurse's station, cradling coffee gone tepid. Ward 4 East drowsed, its 3 occupants stable, submerged in sleep. Charts beckoned, a familiar ritual, when the very air seemed to shift its weight. A peculiar density settled, charged with an invisible static that prickled the fine hairs along my forearms, a low electric hum vibrating just beneath hearing. Instinctively, I sought the windows, anticipating a storm's dramatic arrival, but found only a serene canvas of star-scattered indigo. It was then, a flicker at the edge of vision, that she first manifested, a pale shape haunting the far end of the passage. My head snapped around. Nothing. Emptiness reclaimed the space. Fatigue, I reasoned, amplified by caffeine's waning ghost. Yet a knot tightened deep within my gut, an intuition whispering of dissonance. Another round, I decided, a patrol to soothe the rising disquiet. Past each door, a cursory inspection. Mr. Abernathy in 401, his snores a soft counterpoint to the ward's silence. Mrs. Diaz in 402, tethered to the gentle hiss and sigh of her oxygen concentrator. And room 403. I froze. The bed linens lay in disarray, a vacant hollow where a body should rest. My pulse vaulted. The adjoining bathroom yielded nothing. Empty. Panic flared, hot and sharp. Back at the station, my hand hovered over the intercom, poised to declare a code yellow, a missing soul. But as my fingers brushed the cool plastic, I saw her once more. She stood at the threshold where our active ward bled into the derelict wing, her back a fragile silhouette against the deeper gloom beyond. Tendrils of dark hair cascaded past slender shoulders. "Excuse me." My voice, amplified by the stillness, resonated unnaturally. "You really shouldn't be wandering. Let me help you return to your room." Silence answered. She remained immobile, a statue carved from shadow. A tremor of unease traced my spine, but professionalism asserted itself. A disoriented patient, lost and needing guidance. I advanced, my soft-soled shoes echoing with startling clarity on the polished linoleum. "Mom," I ventured, closing the distance. "Is everything all right?" Still, no reply. Mere feet separated us now. I extended a hand, aiming for the perceived solidity of her shoulder. My fingers met only air, passing through the apparition as if through mist. I recoiled, stumbling, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Slowly, the figure pivoted. I confronted the face of a young woman, her complexion an ethereal, almost luminous white. But her eyes were absolute voids, twin pools of ink reflecting nothing. Her mouth opened, shaped for speech, yet emitted only a low, soul-chilling moan that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. The corridor lights stuttered, faltered, and a wave of profound cold washed through me, stealing my breath. I fled, shameful perhaps, but instinct obliterated training, protocol vanishing like smoke, back to the relative safety of the nurse's station, lungs burning, breath ragged. My fingers, betraying me with their tremor, fumbled with the phone, dialing security. Nurse Vance. 4 East, I gasped when the line connected. Immediate assistance required. We have an intruder on the floor. Intruder? The voice on the other end dripped skepticism. Are you certain it isn't just one of your patients, nurse? No, I insisted, the word tight in my throat. This is different. Please, just send someone up. Disconnecting, I spun back towards the hallway, half braced for the spectral woman to be looming directly behind me. The corridor stretched empty, yet the oppressive weight in the air lingered, thick and expectant, like the moments before lightning cracks the sky. Deep breaths, I commanded myself, battling the frantic rhythm in my chest. There had to be a rational explanation. Exhaustion, hallucination, an elaborate, cruel hoax. But a deeper knowing resonated within me. What I had witnessed defied the natural order, transcended the human. The elevator chimed its arrival, disgorging 2 uniformed security officers. I relayed the encounter, omitting the impossible detail of my hand passing through her. Even in my rattled state, I recognized the precipice of disbelief. Understood, the senior guard acknowledged, his brow furrowed with concern. We'll conduct a thorough sweep. Remain here at the station. Radio us instantly if you observe anything further. I nodded, a measure of relief flooding me at their tangible presence. As their flashlight beams sliced into the shadowed corners down the hall, fear loosened its grip slightly. I was no longer solitary in this strangeness. Yet, as minutes stretched into an unnerving expanse, unease coiled anew. The ward wasn't vast. Their patrol should have concluded. Just as I reached for the radio, the world plunged into absolute blackness. Every light extinguished simultaneously. Even the emergency fixtures remained stubbornly dark. Only the faint, ghostly luminescence of the computer monitors offered any reprieve. And in that sudden, suffocating darkness, I heard it. Footfalls originating from the direction of the sealed wing. Not the solid tread of the security boots, but something lighter, more ephemeral, a whispering shuffle. My hand scrabbled for my phone, its flashlight activating, casting a frail, inadequate beam against the overwhelming void. I swept the light down the corridor. My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins. She was there, the spectral woman, but no longer alone. Behind her, coalescing from the gloom, were other figures, dozens it seemed, all clad in the pale uniformity of hospital gowns, all possessing those same horrifyingly vacant black eyes. They began to drift towards me, their motion disjointed, unnatural, a silent, spectral tide. I retreated instinctively, my mind shrieking commands my paralyzed limbs refused to obey. As they drew nearer, faces swam into horrifying recognition. Mr. Davies, claimed by cardiac failure just last month. Ms. Thorne, whose battle with cancer ended only days ago. And leading the procession, my breath hitched, caught painfully in my throat. Dr. Alistair Finch, my mentor, gone these many years. They encircled me, their collective presence an icy pressure, making respiration a conscious struggle. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for an end I couldn't comprehend. Then, a touch on my shoulder. startlingly warm, solid. My eyes flew open. Dr. Finch stood before me, not the spectral horror, but the man I remembered, his gaze filled with familiar kindness. He offered a gentle smile. "It's quite all right, Alara." His voice resonated, seeming to travel across a vast distance. "We intend you no harm." What is this?" I stammered, the words barely audible wisps. "A thinning," he replied, his voice soft yet resonant. "Between the worlds. Annually, on this specific night, the barrier weakens. We are permitted passage, however brief." "But why?" My gaze swept across the silent assembly of familiar yet utterly changed faces. "Why return?" A melancholic expression touched Dr. Finch's features. Some bear unfinished burdens, others merely yearn for a final glimpse of those they cherished, and some, he paused, his eyes locking onto mine with sudden intensity, some arrive bearing a message. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, uttering words destined to irrevocably alter the trajectory of my existence. As his final syllable faded, the surrounding spirits began to dissolve, their forms wavering like heat haze, the oppressive darkness receding with them. By the time his message concluded, I stood solitary once more in the corridor, the lights flickering erratically back to life overhead. I remained rooted, stunned, the enormity of the experience crashing over me in waves. The elevator chimed again. The two security guards emerged, looking perplexed. "Dispatch, call you again?" one asked. "We got a signal, but when we came up earlier, place was quiet as a tomb." I opened my mouth, the impossible explanation hovering on my tongue, then let it close. How could words possibly encapsulate the preceding hour? "False alarm," I heard myself say, the phrase feeling alien and untrue. "Everything's secured now." As they departed, I collapsed into the chair at the nurse's station, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. Morning would bring choices, difficult and profound. The message Dr. Finch imparted, it demanded action, attention I could not deny. But for this fragile moment, as the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the eastern windows with pale light, I simply allowed myself to breathe, to inhabit a reality suddenly rendered infinitely larger, profoundly stranger, and unexpectedly wondrous. The night shift, and indeed Alara Vance, would never again be quite the same. A disquietude settled deep in my gut, a cold stone lodged there the moment my boots met the concrete lip of the dam. Hundreds of dives, hundreds of identical routines, arrive before dawn, meticulously inspect the life support rig, a curt nod with the overseer, then the plunge, always methodical, utterly predictable. Yet this morning, the reservoir possessed a different character. The familiar opaque jade surface seemed to hold a profounder, more secretive darkness. I ran a gloved hand over my twin oxygen cylinders, tested the regulator's hiss, wiped a bead of perspiration from my brow despite the pre-dawn chill. Fatigue, I reasoned. A restless night. The explanation felt hollow, failing to dislodge the unease. Drawing a ragged breath that tasted metallic through the mouthpiece. I cinched my mask tight, flashed the thumbs up to the waiting deckhand, and surrendered myself to the water's embrace. The initial shock was a familiar violence, cold seizing my face, tightening the skin across my cheekbones. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my eardrums, a percussive welcome I usually appreciated for the alertness it brought. Ordinarily, the descent would lull me into the steady cadence of practiced breathing. My torch beam sliced a cone of luminescence through the suspended silt as I followed the immense, curving wall of concrete downward. Near the surface, thin veils of algae waved gently, but deeper, the wall was stark, unblemished. 30 feet. My objective, a hairline fracture noted in a prior survey. A glance at my chronometer, another at the depth gauge, then a deliberate fin kick propelled me towards the coordinates. My breathing found its rhythm, the mechanical sigh of the regulator slowly supplanting the earlier tremor of anxiety. It was then I perceived it, the first tendrils of sound weaving through the dense water, a melody, faint as a half-forgotten dream, ghosting from nowhere. It possessed the crackling patina of an old phonograph recording, the volume barely a whisper, yet the distinct sigh of brass instruments was undeniable, like some phantom broadcast from the 1930s perhaps. I gave my head a sharp shake, checked the comms link. Silence from the surface crew, a tap against my ear. Perhaps trapped water creating an auditory illusion, but the spectral tune persisted, a delicate undercurrent to the silence. Ignore it. Focus. A job to be done. Merely the mind, starved of stimulus, fabricating phantoms. I neared the fissure in the concrete, angled my light, commenced the inspection. The crack itself was unremarkable, a vertical scar a few inches across. I traced its rough edge with a fingertip, likely requiring sealant. Reaching for the camera clipped to my harness, I felt the music swell, not aggressively loud, but undeniably nearer. The melancholic trumpet, the insistent brush of a snare drum, the very water around me seemed to resonate with that antiquated, slightly distorted quality, like listening through time itself. My chest constricted. The pulse quickened again. Logic screamed hallucination, yet the sound felt viscerally real. My torch swept the void, only the endless mottled gray of the dam wall and the lazy dance of particulates in the beam. I captured several images of the crack, forcing concentration. Then, pushing off the wall, I moved to survey the next section. As I swam, the music ebbed and flowed, a capricious signal from a distant, decaying transmitter. Another tap to my helmet yielded nothing. I pressed onward, along the vast concrete expanse, battling the knot tightening in my belly, aiming my camera towards a cluster of potentially corroded bolts. Click, flash, click. A distinct tap against my faceplate, soft, insistent, like knuckles rapping on glass. My head snapped back instinctively. I blinked, staring at the inner surface of my mask. There, shimmering wetly directly before my eyes, was the perfect imprint of a hand. Small, almost delicate. Ice flooded my veins. My heart became a wild drum against my ribs, breath catching raggedly in my throat. I raised my own gloved hand to wipe it away, but before contact, the image dissolved, retracting into the glass, like breath on a cold pane, leaving only the faintest, rapidly vanishing trace of moisture. A tightness clamped around my chest. The acrid taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth. My eyes, wide with disbelief, darted around. The beam from my torch trembled, betraying the tension seizing my arm. Nothing. No other diver. No curious fish. Not even a scrap of drifting debris to offer a rational explanation. The urge to bolt for the surface was overwhelming, yet tempered by the professional's fear of ridicule. Elias, the steady hand, the veteran of a decade underwater, never spooked, never panicked. Perhaps I'd inadvertently touched my face. The thought felt thin, unconvincing. Navigating around the next buttress, I continued my search for structural flaws. 10 minutes submerged, my watch informed me. The music remained my phantom companion, sometimes a full-bodied swing tune, insistent with horns and percussion, sometimes fading to a barely audible whisper. It seemed to emanate not from any single point, but from the water itself, omnipresent. My limbs felt leaden, my breathing stubbornly uneven, each inhale and exhale punctuated by the regulator's amplified hiss. After several more minutes, tracing the colossal curve of the wall, I decided, enough. A break was necessary. The thought of transmitting, hearing phantom orchestras, and seeing ghostly handprints was absurd. Instead, I signaled the surface, requesting permission to ascend for an equipment check. Affirmative crackled back. I began my ascent, slow, deliberate, the mandatory decompression stops, stretching into agonizing eternities. I stared out into the impenetrable gloom, the music gradually attenuating as I rose, though faint strains lingered. Breaking the surface felt like bursting into an alien world, the sunlight painfully bright. Marcus, my topside support, peered down, his expression etched with concern. "Everything all right down there, Elias?" I nodded, pulling off my mask, the cool air a relief. "Condensation," I lied, "and maybe some interference on the comms. Wanted to check." He frowned slightly. "Quiet up here. No chatter, no music. Need a break? Swap out?" "No, I'm good," I insisted, perhaps too quickly. "Just need a minute." I ambled a few paces away, shedding my tanks and harness, meticulously examining the mask. No fissures, no anomalies. The interior glass was pristine. My gloves were intact. I splashed water on my face, rubbed my eyes. My skin felt strangely feverish, despite the water's chill. The urge to confide in Marcus warred with the certainty of sounding unhinged. "Think I'll give it another go," I finally said, forcing a casual tone. He shrugged, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "All right, take it easy down there." Mask resealed, checks completed, I slipped back into the quiet jade depths. This time, I forced my focus onto the dam structure, pushing aside the lingering dread. My torch led the way towards the base, near the outflow grates, a zone requiring inspection for debris accumulation. 40 feet down, the water here was noticeably colder, the silence amplifying the sound of my own breathing inside the helmet. And then it returned, the antique melody, still distant, yet somehow more pervasive, weaving itself into the very fabric of the underwater silence. It felt closer now, as if the source was drawing nearer, or perhaps I was becoming more attuned to its frequency. A tremor ran through my arms. I gripped the massive outflow grate, its metal surface slick with a thin biofilm. "Get a grip, Elias. Just do the job." Turning my head to examine the securing bolts, a flicker of movement registered at the periphery of my vision. My light snapped towards it. Empty water. No fish, no drifting weed, nothing. Yet that ephemeral suggestion of motion sent a fresh wave of tension through my muscles. My heart hammered, a frantic prisoner in my chest. I clamped down harder on the regulator's mouthpiece. Expedite this. Photos of the grate. Beam tracing the edges. Document. Then, a feather-light pressure against my shoulder. Indistinct, yet undeniably like fingers resting there for a fleeting second. I spun around, torch beam slashing through the water. Nothing. The music swelled, brass notes clearer, more insistent. My jaw clenched until it ached. I pushed away from the grate, moving back along the main wall. A low vibration pulsed through the water, a thrumming against my eardrums. The music seemed to shift tempo, slowing to a mournful, archaic ballad. A vocalist's tone drifted in and out, the words unintelligible, muffled by distance and time, yet the cadence was languid, almost soothing, which was somehow more terrifying. Abandon the survey. Ascend immediately. The thought screamed in my mind, but protocol demanded a full circuit of this section. Stick to the plan. Get the images. Get out. I pressed on, scanning the concrete, my torch illuminating minor fissures, the camera dutifully recording. My breath remained shallow, my hand unsteady. Just as I prepared to move towards the final segment of the inspection route, it appeared again, stark against the inner curve of my mask. Another handprint, sharper this time, terrifyingly detailed. The distinct outline of fingers, the subtle curve of the palm, even the faint tracery of creases where a thumb would flex. Too intricate for a random smear, too defined to be my own glove's impression. My stomach lurched violently. A choked gasp escaped into my regulator. I squeezed my eyes shut, a desperate, futile gesture, shaking my head. When I opened them, the print remained, impossibly present. My mouth was parchment dry despite the constant flow of air. My pulse thudded sickeningly in my throat. Then, like the first time, it began to recede, fading slowly, deliberately, as if absorbing back into the glass. I raised my trembling hand, felt the cool, smooth surface beneath my fingertips as I wiped. It vanished completely. The music played on, now threaded with a faint, static hiss, the sound of a radio dial slipping between stations. Enough. I turned, signaling the surface. Ascending, mission aborted. I didn't care about the questions. The supervisor's voice, tinny in my ear. Elias? Problem? Feeling off, I managed, my voice strained. Need to come up. Roger that. Ascend slowly. Safety stops. I climbed through the water column. Each foot gained a small victory. The music pursued me relentlessly until the 20-foot mark, then gradually dissolved into silence. By the time my head broke the surface, it was gone. Marcus and Finn reached down, hauling me onto the platform. Gear malfunction? Marcus asked immediately. I shook my head, unable to form words. My face must have been sheet white because his concern deepened. Whoa, Elias, you okay? Need to sit? I nodded numbly, sinking onto the edge, fumbling to remove my mask and regulator. My chest felt banded with steel. I was gulping air like a landed fish. I avoided their gaze, the shame mixing with the lingering terror. How could I possibly explain? Marcus pressed gently. Did you see something? Hear something unusual? A long pause stretched between us. Finally, I met his eyes. Yeah, I admitted, my voice low. Music. Sounded like old records and weird prints inside my mask. Marcus stared, then a skeptical frown creased his forehead. You pulling my leg, man? No, I whispered. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, we'll do a full diagnostic on your gear. Maybe condensation playing tricks, a reflection, the music, comms interference, both passing way off. I knew it wasn't any of those things, but I just nodded, too drained to argue. We went through the motions. Mask, regulator, comms unit. Everything checked out perfectly. No leaks, no cracks, no faults. I sat there for a long time, trying to will my pulse back to normal, the clammy chill on my skin defying the warming sun. Goosebumps prickled my arms. The tension in my neck and shoulders was a solid, aching knot. "Look," Marcus said finally, "if you want to call it a day, Finn and I can finish up, or we can call in relief." Part of me screamed to pack up, drive away, never look back. But pride, that stubborn professional core, resisted. Rumors spread fast. Elias spooked. Unthinkable. After another 10 minutes, forcing myself calm, I made a decision born more of obstinacy than courage. "One more quick pass," I said. "Just need to check the upper joints near the surface. Then I'm done." Marcus gave me a long look, but just nodded. "Be careful." I submerged again, forcing slow, even breaths, descending only 15 feet this time, staying within the brighter, sun-dappled upper layer. The water felt ordinary again, just cold and murky. I scanned the massive concrete joints, snapping a few final photographs. I listened intently. Only the rhythmic sigh of my regulator, the gentle lapping of water against the dam. No brass, no static, no ghostly singing. Perhaps it was over. As I prepared to signal my final ascent, a flicker, peripheral, to my right. I turned. Far off in the gloom, a shape, indistinct, fluid, seemed to drift momentarily before dissolving as my torch beam swept towards it. A cold prickle crawled across my scalp. My heart surged violently. A quick, panicked glance at the inside of my mask revealed nothing new, but the dread was back, thick and suffocating. I signaled my return, ascending with deliberate slowness. Reaching the platform, I simply told Marcus, "Done." He didn't question it. My breathing was shallow. My arms felt like lead. I climbed out, stripped off my gear. Finn ambled over. "How'd it go?" I offered only a non-committal shrug, pulling off my wetsuit top, toweling my face. My head throbbed. The tension held my muscles rigid, yet a restless energy pulsed beneath. I packed my equipment in silence, loaded the truck, and drove away from the dam, the structure looming in my rearview mirror like a silent, brooding sentinel. The entire journey home, my eyes kept flicking to the mask, resting on the passenger seat, half expecting a spectral handprint to bloom on the glass, half listening for the phantom strains of that impossible music to bleed from the radio speakers. Nothing. But my nerves were frayed wires. Back home, a long hot shower failed to chase the chill from my bones. The memory of that melody, the way it made my skin crawl, replayed endlessly. The handprint, vivid and detailed, the fleeting shape in the depths, that inexplicable brush against my shoulder. Human. It felt human. The following day, I filed my report, relaying the structural findings to my supervisor. He listened patiently as I recounted the other anomalies. He looked perplexed, offering logical, unsatisfying possibilities. Acoustic quirks of submerged structures, resonant frequencies in old tunnels. He suggested, kindly, that I take a few days off, rest. I agreed, though it wasn't mere physical exhaustion that plagued me. It was a profound sense of unease, a feeling of having brushed against something ancient and inexplicable, leaving a residue I couldn't wash away. I felt like I'd left something unfinished down there in the cold dark. The phone never rang with follow-up questions. The photos were deemed adequate. The cracks were routine. No other diver reported hearing music. No one else found handprints inside their masks. I still dive. Dam inspections, underwater construction, the familiar routine. But I've never returned to that particular reservoir. I informed my boss, flatly, that assignment was off limits. He gave me a curious glance, but respected the boundary. Sometimes, late at night, sitting alone in the quiet house, I'll hear it. Just a fragment, a few ephemeral notes of brass drifting on the edge of perception, like a radio tuned to the static between worlds, before vanishing as quickly as it came. I possess no explanation for what transpired in the depths that day. I only have the certainty of what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I am not a man given to superstition. I trust my training, my equipment, my senses, but my training offered no defense against the music. My equipment couldn't explain the handprints. My senses confirmed a reality that defied logic. I know the touch I felt on my shoulder, and the echo of that antique melody, forever entwined with the memory of the cold, silent, deep water, still haunts the edges of my thoughts every time I prepare to descend. Dust motes danced like frantic spirits in the slanted light, piercing the gloom of a corrugated metal tomb on the town's forgotten fringe. A sepulchral scent, thick with decaying leather and the ghost of stale caffeine, clung to the humid air, plastering my shirt to my skin within moments. Silas, a local curator of discarded histories, presided over the auction, a haphazard assembly of life's cast-offs, chairs shedding varnish like old regrets, lamps clouded with grime, crates overflowing with vinyl memories pressed into silent grooves, and then, canted against a skeletal filing cabinet bleeding rust, I saw it, the looking glass, not imposing in stature, barely reaching my chest, yet its frame, heavy timber scarred and gouged, commanded my gaze. No familiar face stared back from its surface. Only a depthless, leaden shimmer met my eyes, like the patina on long-buried silver. Drawn by an invisible tether, I moved closer, sinking into a crouch before it. An inexplicable compulsion urged my fingers towards the wood. Here, smooth as riverstone. There, splintered, resisting, a testament to some abandoned effort at restoration. The glass itself possessed a viscid opacity, a fog that refused to lift. Tilting my head, angling for clarity, I discerned the faintest adumbration within, the shape of a man, starkly, impossibly, not my own. I blinked, leaned forward until my breath misted the surface that wasn't truly reflecting. The silhouette held fast, an anchor in the swirling gray. A slow exhale escaped me as I retreated, the frantic drummer in my ribs beating against bone. Ignorance warred with fascination. A strange magnetism emanated from the enigma. Silas, ever watchful, ambled over, his throat emitting a dry rasp. He offered the mirror, a curiosity from some forgotten estate, confessing it gave him the shivers and naming a price that barely whispered its value. An eyebrow arched on my part drew only a shrug. The transaction was swift, cash exchanged, the mirror secured in the bed of my truck with nylon straps. My own little emporium of antiquities often thrived on the peculiar. Unusual artifacts commanded attention, and surely, I reasoned, Some soul would appreciate a mirror steeped in strangeness. The true depth of that strangeness, however, remained veiled. Back within the familiar quiet of my shop, I wrestled the mirror inside, propping its weight against the wall behind my worn counter. The instant my hands left the frame, a current of unease traced a path down my spine. My sanctuary, usually punctuated only by the shuffling feet of regulars, felt unnervingly still that afternoon. Alone, I turned the lock on the front door, the click echoing slightly, and pivoted back to the artifact. Its surface now held a peculiar, almost liquid luminescence. Approaching, anticipating my own visage, I found only emptiness, a dense, impenetrable haze clinging to the glass, my chest constricted. Hesitantly, I reached out, my fingertips grazing the cool plane. The mist swirled, coalescing. A face emerged, not mine, not precisely. A variant, hair shorn shorter, a faint pale scar tracing the line above his brow. This reflection moved with its own volition, asynchronous, regarding me with an unnervingly familiar yet hostile stare. I froze, my throat parched, as I instinctively withdrew my hand, his pressed flat against the glass from within, a perfect, terrifying inversion. My own arm hung limply at my side, his remained raised in defiance. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a low buzzing whine filling my ears. Soundlessly, his lips formed words, shapes lost behind an invisible barrier, like watching a desperate plea through soundproof glass. The pulse in my temples throbbed audibly. Run or decipher? He mouthed the silent message again, urgency etched in the tension around his eyes. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, the image dissolved, leaving the mirror placid and blank once more. I swallowed, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. Vertigo threatened, and I groped for a nearby stool, sinking onto it. After moments spent regaining equilibrium, I rose and circled the mirror, examining its mundane construction. Plain wood, a back-end of stiff card held by tiny nails. A tap yielded only solid resistance. Facing it again, my own reflection peered back, tired, damp with perspiration, visibly unnerved. A shaky laugh escaped me, an optical illusion, surely. Fatigue, the oppressive heat, some subtle warp in the antique glass. I decided retreat was the wisest course, sliding the mirror into the cluttered sanctuary of my back office, hidden from casual view. The drive home was mechanical, followed by a shower that failed to wash away the clinging unease. The memory of that other self's eyes, the pressure of his hand against the glass, refused to fade. My own hands trembled intermittently. Tomorrow, I vowed, in the clear light of day, I would conduct a more thorough examination. Sleep offered little respite, plagued by tossing limbs and the recurring vision of that inverse hand against the glass. Before dawn painted the sky, I was back at the shop, the key grating in the lock. I made straight for the office. The mirror stood sentinel where I'd left it, innocuous against a cabinet piled with forgotten receipts. From a distance, it appeared merely old, worn at the edges. A sigh escaped me as I stepped closer. The surface remained inert for several heartbeats, then rippled. Another figure swam into view. Me, yet advanced in years, temples frosted with silver, clad in a suit I'd never possessed. This iteration radiated calm, lifting a hand in a slow wave. On his finger, a heavy gold band glinted. My gaze dropped to my own bare hand, my simple attire. My breath quickened. Then this older self turned his head, a glance over his shoulder as if acknowledging another presence. The glass flickered, and a second phantasm materialized behind him, shouldering forward aggressively. This newcomer tried to displace the older one. They exchanged glances, thick with unconcealed frustration. A chilling awareness passed between them. The faint buzzing returned, the sound of television static on an empty channel. Their mouths moved, shaping silent arguments. Anger, desperation. Before I could process, the mirror blanched, wiped clean again. I stumbled back a step, my pulse a frantic drum against my sternum. For several days, the mirror remained shrouded beneath a dust sheet in a corner of my office. Selling it felt impossible, a dereliction of some unknown duty. What horrors might it unleash upon an unsuspecting owner? Yet, curiosity gnawed, relentless. I'd find my gaze drifting to the shrouded form, wondering if those spectral versions of me watched from within their gray prison. Sleep became a shallow, troubled state. A persistent ache settled in my shoulders. My stomach churned with low-grade anxiety. Going to the shop became an act of will, a battle between dread and the insatiable need to understand. On the fifth evening, I lingered after closing. The front door bolted, the main lights extinguished, leaving only the intimate glow of my desk lamp to push back the encroaching shadows. With trembling hands, I pulled the sheet away. The silence in the office felt immense, watchful. My palms were slick. I waved a hand experimentally before the glass. For a moment, nothing. Then the surface shimmered into life. A younger me, perhaps from years past, materialized. A familiar hairstyle, a jacket I dimly recalled owning. This ghost stared directly at me, lips moving, and I recognized the silent shape of my own name. Abruptly, a second reflection elbowed him aside. A third pressed in from behind. A crowd of Elias variants, subtly distinct in dress, posture, age. My pulse surged. They were arguing, a silent, frantic pantomime. Hands gestured wildly. Accusing fingers pointed, sometimes at each other, sometimes unnervingly at me. My chest tightened. Each face bore a different burden. Fury, pleading, grim resolve. The younger one in the jacket tapped insistently on the glass, then pointed at me, shaking his head vehemently. The older, suited figure slid smoothly into view from the right, pressed a finger to his lips in a silencing gesture, then beckoned me closer. Another variant, this one bearing the marks of hardship, a cast encasing his left arm, pushed forward, countering the older one's invitation with a frantic shake of his head. All three then turned as a fourth emerged, stern-faced, wearing some unfamiliar, official-looking uniform. The silent squabble intensified, a jostling match for prominence at the forefront of the glass. My stomach twisted into knots. My hand found the mirror's frame. A faint vibration hummed beneath my fingertips, a subtle thrum of trapped energy. Swallowing hard, I leaned closer. "What do you want?" The words emerged as a ragged whisper, scratching my dry throat. I saw the older reflection mouth a response, instantly triggering a fresh wave of silent protest from the others. The uniformed figure shoved the suited one aside with surprising force. The older reflection stumbled, an action strangely jarring, viewed through the glass, like watching figures struggling to pass through a too narrow doorway. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. My mind spun, Were these potential futures vying for dominance? Was their battle predicated on my choice, my action? My attention snagged on the younger one in the jacket again. He pressed his palm flat against the barrier, his eyes locking with mine. A wave of icy cold washed through me. Though no sound reached me, his lips formed slow, deliberate shapes. "Don't listen," I interpreted. "Don't listen to them." The suited man saw this, his expression darkening with rage. I recoiled, hands shaking uncontrollably. Then, impossibly, a faint sound reached me. Tap, 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 like fingernails on glass, from the inside. Leaning in again, heart hammering, I saw the younger reflection tapping, pointing at me, his eyes wild with urgency. My thoughts raced, chaotic. Possible futures. Which path was true? Which self deserved my trust? Perhaps none. Perhaps each fought only for its own continuation, needing me to validate its existence. The suited man glared, jabbing a finger towards the younger one. The man with the cast shoved the uniformed figure back. A silent war for the future of Elias, waged within the confines of antique glass. I stumbled backward, catching my foot on a stack of forgotten ledgers. My ankle twisted sharply, pain flaring, but I caught myself on the desk, staying upright, eyes never leaving the mirror. The reflections intensified their struggle, pushing, shoving, their gazes fierce, seeking my attention whenever they broke free of the melee. Nausea churned within me. Sweat trickled into my eye. Smash it or understand it. The money paid seemed trivial now, dwarfed by the consuming enigma. I chose the latter path for now. Reaching out, I pressed both palms flat against the cold glass. My breath hitched. The surface felt frigid, yet pulsed with that strange, lifelike vibration. The reflections froze mid-struggle, their eyes snapping to my hands, then flicking towards each other, expectant. I pressed harder. "I can't hear you," I whispered, the words strained. "Show me. Show me what you want." Silence held for a beat. Then the reflection with the cast fumbled in a pocket, producing a small, worn notebook. He flipped through pages rapidly, holding them up to the glass, but the script remained frustratingly illegible. The suited man snatched the notebook, tossing it aside within the mirror's world. He then reached into his jacket, producing what looked like a folded check or contract, waving it insistently. The younger man in the jacket reacted instantly, slamming his hand down on the suited man's wrist, knocking the paper away. They grappled silently while the uniformed figure maneuvered, trying to wedge himself back to the front. I remained there, palms aching dully against the glass, breath coming in heavy sighs. My mind felt paralyzed, locked into observing their desperate, silent campaign for my attention. The urge to pull away, to flee, warred with an equally potent refusal to look away. They were me, distorted, fragmented, yet undeniably connected. Answers. I craved answers. My shoulders bunched with tension, my eyes burned from the strain of watching their voiceless drama. The uniformed one caught my eye, glanced at his rivals, then pointed definitively outside the mirror's frame, towards the room behind me. A trick? I hesitated, then turned my head slightly. Nothing but dusty shelves and the solitary lamp, casting long shadows. When I looked back, the uniformed reflection was closer, his face pressed near the glass. He mouthed a single, emphatic word I couldn't decipher. Suddenly, the surface flickered violently, like a failing bulb, and all the figures vanished. I was left staring into my own eyes, pale, sweat-sheened, utterly alone. A profound exhaustion settled over me, bone deep. My legs felt unsteady. I leaned heavily on the desk for support, listening to the ragged sound of my own breathing in the oppressive quiet. The mirror offered only my mundane reflection, mocking the recent phantasmagoria. I glanced towards the locked door, confirming my solitude, then back at the glass, scrutinizing my own face, half expecting another self to rupture the surface. Nothing. Dragging my hands down my face, I felt the rasp of stubble, the dampness of my skin. An hour, perhaps more, had bled away in that silent confrontation with my potential selves, each desperate to sway my course. Which to trust? Was trust even relevant? My heart still thudded erratically. My chest remained tight. It felt as though I'd run miles while standing still. With unsteady hands, I draped the sheet back over the mirror, the cloth settling like a shroud. My back screamed from sustained tension. Switching off the lamp, I gathered my keys. As I left the office, my gaze lingered on the veiled mirror, a morbid part of me anticipating movement beneath the fabric, the suggestion of a form. It remained still. I locked the office, then the shop, stepping out into the cool embrace of the early night. The dark sky felt vast, the breeze a welcome balm on my clammy skin. My shirt clung unpleasantly. In the truck, I sat for a long moment, hands resting on the wheel, the silent movie of the mirror replaying in my mind. A colossal puzzle, constructed from pieces belonging to entirely different sets. Finally, the engine rumbled to life. The drive home passed in a vacuum, devoid of music or external sound. My fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the wheel, my eyes fixed on the road, but my thoughts remained captive within that back office. Would they return? Was I meant to choose a future, to empower one reflection over the others? Their struggle felt intensely personal, a fight for their very existence, perhaps dependent on my intervention. Uncertainty gnawed. Tossing the mirror away felt like abandoning a part of myself, however terrifying. It called to me, a siren song of forbidden knowledge wrapped in fear. Home offered no solace. I sat on the couch in the dark, body stiff, head pounding. Eventually, I switched on a lamp, its light illuminating a blank wall that seemed to mock my internal chaos. A plan was needed, yet I hadn't the first clue how to formulate one against the impossible. A strange, volatile mix of exhilaration and cold dread curdled in my gut. I resolved to return at dawn. I had to know if they would reappear, if communication was possible. Sleep, when it finally came hours later, was shallow and fraught. I woke feeling unrested, the familiar knot of anxiety tight in my stomach, my limbs heavy, neck rigid. Coffee went unfinished. I drove back to the shop through the gray pre-dawn light. In the office, I removed the sheet, bracing myself, but the mirror remained stubbornly ordinary. My own tired eyes stared back. I leaned close, waiting, searching the depths. Nothing shifted, nothing emerged. That was a week ago. Since then, the glass has remained inert, offering only faithful, mundane reflections. Yet every time I pass the office door, a jolt, like static electricity, prickles beneath my skin. Selling it remains unthinkable. Destroying it feels like a potential act of self-destruction. Those silent selves, their desperate struggle, their urgent pleas, they linger, Are they still there, just beyond the veil, waiting? I've told no one. The story sounds like madness, but small synchronicities have begun to surface in my daily life. Glancing at a jacket remarkably similar to the one worn by my younger self, noticing a gold ring in a jeweler's window that echoes the one worn by my older variant. Now, every decision, no matter how small, feels weighted. Does this path lead to the man with the cost? Does that choice pave the way for the stern figure in uniform? Which future, if any, is the right one? Am I even supposed to choose? The mirror has irrevocably altered my perception of my own life, stretching it into a landscape of branching possibilities. I live with the constant humming tension that at any moment the glass might flare to life again, the silent cacophony resuming, the crowd of potential me's pushing, shoving, demanding I follow their lead. And every day, as I unlock the shop, my gaze inevitably flicks to the office door, half listening for the muffled sounds of a fight that exists only in silence on the other side of the glass. The mirror waits, covered, and I wait, caught in the cross currents of what might be. Hemlock Hollow whispered promises of sanctuary, a name Alara clung to as she fled the city's relentless concrete maw. The metropolis, a cacophony of sirens and jostling bodies, had frayed her nerves to raw threads. She sought solace in a modest dwelling huddled at the town's edge, its back turned squarely towards the ancient, brooding woods. Proximity to that untamed expanse, the profound potential for silence, these were the tonics her weary spirit craved, and for a brief, blessed interlude, Hemlock Hollow seemed to grant her wish. Dawn no longer screamed its arrival, but feathered in with the liquid melody of unseen birdsong. Morning air carried the papery sigh of leaves, not the impatient blare of horns. Isolation began to feel less like loneliness and more like a homecoming. The quiet settled, deep and pervasive. Yet tranquility, like dawn mist, proved ephemeral. Scarcely 2 weeks had breathed by when the peace developed hairline fractures. It began subtly, after an evening spent adrift in the warm currents of nostalgia, reconnecting with a cherished friend miles away. Returning late, the very air within her small house felt altered, a discordant note in the familiar harmony, a wrongness she initially ascribed to the late hour and weariness. Inside, the familiar ritual of tumblers clicking in locks, the swift plunge into darkness before climbing the stairs. None of it could quite dispel the burgeoning unease. The house wasn't merely quiet, it felt unnervingly vacant, a soundless vacuum. Sleep became a skittish quarry, darting away whenever she drew close. She'd drift, only to snap awake moments later, eyes straining against the oppressive black, ears straining for a sound that refused to coalesce. Then, near the night's absolute nadir, perhaps 2 hours past midnight, it manifested, a faint, dry scorch, a persistent, dragging friction originating from somewhere just outside the walls. Alara lay utterly still, breath caught in her throat, her pulse accelerating like a frantic drum against her ribs. A reluctant magnetism drew her from the bed. She moved like a phantom through her own home, inching towards the window, parting the curtain by a mere fraction. Moonlight rendered the yard in stark, skeletal relief. The woods loomed beyond, an impenetrable wall of shadow. Nothing moved. The scraping ceased as suddenly as it had begun. A wind-tossed branch, perhaps? A foraging nocturnal creature. Rationalizations skirmished with a primal dread. Retreating to the illusory safety of her bed, pulling the covers high like a child's flimsy shield, she eventually spiraled down into an exhausted, troubled slumber. Daylight, bold and uncompromising, temporarily banished the night's phantoms. A meticulous circuit of the house exterior revealed nothing out of place. No branches lay against the siding. No disturbed earth hinted at animal intrusion. Alara admonished herself for succumbing to shadows and frayed nerves, forcing her day into a pattern of determined normalcy. But night, inexorable and patient, returned, and with it, the sound. Earlier this time, closer to midnight, the identical desiccated scraping, a relentless abrasion against the house's outer skin. She sat bolt upright in bed, every muscle coiled, listening with an intensity that bordered on pain. Ignore it. Sleep. The command felt hollow, easily overwhelmed by the chilling certainty that something waited just beyond the thin barrier of wood and plaster, patient and unnervingly close. Again, the unwilling pilgrimage to the window. The yard lay empty beneath the moon's cold, impartial gaze, but her eyes, drawn by an unseen current towards the forest's edge, snagged on an anomaly. There, nestled within the deepest umbra, where trees surrendered to grass, stood a form, vague, static, a silhouette defined only by its stark contrast to the lesser darkness around it, observing her dwelling. Alara squinted, desperate for a detail the gloom refused to yield. A spire of pure ice seemed to trace its path down her spine. She recoiled from the glass, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate for escape. A frantic search through kitchen drawers produced a heavy metal flashlight. Returning to the window, she drew a ragged breath, thumbed the switch, and cast its stark, interrogating beam towards the tree line. Gone, utterly vanished into the absolute black from which it had emerged. She swept the light back and forth, pulse frantic, but only impenetrable shadow met her desperate search. Imagination, she told herself, the word flimsy against the weight of her fear. Tricks of light and overwrought nerves. Sleep, when it finally arrived, was a shallow, haunted state. Several nights unfolded in unbroken silence. Alara cautiously began to loosen the knot of tension within her, entertaining the fragile possibility that she had indeed overreacted, mistaking a deer for dread, a shadow for substance. The fear remained, a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of her thoughts, but she actively suppressed it. Then, a week later, the precarious calm shattered irrevocably. She was immersed in a novel, seated in the living room's solitary pool of lamplight, the clock hands nearing 11. The house breathed its usual nocturnal quietude, the very stillness she had once coveted. And then, abruptly, jarringly, the scraping sound returned, emanating distinctly from the side wall, not hurried, but slow, deliberate, methodical. The sound of something dense and resistant being purposefully dragged along the clapboard. Alara froze, the book tumbling unheeded from her lap. Her heart gave a painful lurch, pounding against the sudden, ringing silence that followed the cessation of the noise. She rose, propelled towards the window by a force stronger than her mounting terror. Peering out, she saw it again. The figure, still positioned at the precise cusp of the woods, an unwavering obsidian statue against the murky backdrop, its attention seemingly fixed solely upon her home. Fear surged, hot and acidic, scrambling her thoughts into a chaotic jumble. Flee, confront, call for help. Yet an instinct, primal and insistent, screamed a silent command. Stay inside. Stay behind the frail protection of walls, where whatever it was could not physically breach her sanctuary. Stumbling back from the window, her hand trembling uncontrollably, she snatched her phone. The illuminated digits of the emergency line seemed to mock her. There's someone watching my house. The anticipated disbelief, the potential dismissal, they paralyzed her. She opted instead for vigilance, extinguishing the lights, retreating into the house's deeper shadows, sitting huddled in the oppressive dark, straining her ears against the silence. After an agonizing eternity, the scraping did not resume. Silence, heavy and absolute, reclaimed the night. Dawn arrived not with relief, but with grim resolve. She needed tangible proof, some validation that her sanity remained intact. Ilara ventured outside, her steps purposeful, her gaze sweeping the ground near the wall where the sound had been most distinct. And there, pressed deep into the damp earth, precisely at the woodland's ragged edge, was a single, stark impression. Not hers. Impossibly large, unnervingly elongated, and stamped into the soil with a force that spoke of immense, unnatural weight. A profound coldness seeped into her bones, extinguishing the nascent warmth of the morning sun. All rational explanations disintegrated. No creature of the known woods left such a track. Something alien, something deeply wrong, had stood precisely there, observing. That evening, the house transformed into a besieged fortress, every lock meticulously bolted, every window sash double-checked, each potential point of ingress secured before Ilara retreated to her bedroom. Sleep was a distant, unattainable shore. Each groan of the old house settling, every rustle of leaves outside the glass, became amplified, monstrous portents in the suffocating quiet. Around 3 a.m, the scraping erupted anew, louder this time, sharper, more insistent, and chillingly emanating from the back of the house near her bedroom window. She lay encased in blankets and terror, mind racing through frantic, impossible scenarios. To look felt like extending an invitation to madness, yet not knowing was its own form of torment. Gathering the tattered remnants of her courage, flashlight clutched like a holy relic, she forced herself from the bed, creeping towards the back door with its glass pane. A shuddering breath, a moment bracing against the anticipated horror, and she flicked on the beam, directing its stark glare into the backyard. It stood there, closer, impossibly closer, positioned halfway between the dark maw of the woods and her back steps. Raw panic clawed at her throat, stealing her breath. Tall, unnaturally gaunt, its form seemed to absorb the surrounding darkness, a vaguely anthropomorphic void against the lesser gloom of the night. It remained utterly motionless, utterly silent. Watching, Ilara emitted a choked gasp, stumbling backward, her free hand fumbling uselessly with the deadbolt she'd already secured hours before. She killed the flashlight beam, as if plunging the scene back into darkness could somehow negate its reality. She collapsed against the cool plaster of the hallway wall, breath tearing through her lungs in ragged bursts, pressing herself small, trying desperately to banish the image, searing itself onto the backs of her eyelids. Morning found her hollow-eyed, depleted, but unshakably resolute. She could not endure another night suspended in that abyss of fear. A single bag packed with frantic, trembling hands, a strained, breathless call to a friend residing in a distant, safer reality. Then, flight. She drove away from Hemlock Hollow without risking a single backward glance, watching the small, isolated house diminish in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed by the road. She told herself it was a temporary retreat, a necessary respite to reclaim her equilibrium. But a deeper, colder certainty resonated within the marrow of her bones. She would never return. The nature of the figure, its silent, scraping nocturnal vigil, remained an agonizing, unanswered question mark branded onto her psyche. Yet, in quiet moments, when shadows lengthen or an unexpected silence falls, the image invariably resurfaces. The tall, tenebrous shape standing sentinel at the tree line, patient, unwavering, waiting. And Alara knows, with a conviction that chills her blood, that it remains there still, a guardian of nameless dread, anticipating her impossible return. The effigy snagged my gaze the instant I breached the threshold of that sepulchral antique store. Scarcely larger than my cupped hand, it nonetheless commanded attention amidst the gallery of sun-bleached canvases and fractured porcelain. Its texture, a scabrous umbral stone reminiscent of cooled lava, formed a vaguely humanoid silhouette, dominated by immense eyes etched with unsettling, labyrinthine grooves. A peculiar tremor, a jolt of disquiet, shot through me upon first contact. My fingertips buzzed. An unexpected bloom of warmth pulsed against my palm. Impulse overtook reason, and I acquired it. The sum was negligible, and the wizened proprietor behind the cluttered counter possessed an air of almost desperate relief. Wrapped in yesterday's newsprint, the figure came with me, a dissonant hum of dread clinging stubbornly to the periphery of my thoughts. Evening found me back in my solitary dwelling, a compact one-bedroom affair occupying the second floor of a time-worn building. Its anatomy consisted of paper-thin partitions and floors that groaned underfoot. The corridor perpetually reeked of my neighbor's stale coffee brew, yet that day, a different scent seemed to weave through it. Something acrid, like scorched timber. Imagination, I told myself. I carried the effigy inside, depositing it upon the end table flanking my sofa. An immediate shift in the apartment's tenor was palpable. The air grew leaden, stagnant, defying the cross breeze from my open windows. Pacing the small living area, I paused before the figure again, swiping at its dusty surface with a cloth. The stone beneath my touch seemed to intensify its heat, radiating a warmth that felt intrinsic, alive. Beads of sweat materialized on my brow. My shirt adhered damply to my spine. That inaugural night was a descent. Sleep offered no refuge, only a dream, or perhaps its more malevolent cousin. A voice intruded, syllabifying in some guttural, alien tongue the phrases sharp-edged and relentlessly cyclical. Accompanying it was a grating friction, stone abrading stone, a sound that transcended mere acoustics to vibrate deep within my cranial bones. I woke suffocating, hands trembling, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The room hung thick with the odor of hot ash. evocative of a doused campfire, but laced with a bitter chemical undertone. Flicking on the lamp revealed faint obsidian rings upon the floorboards. Small, scattered near the bed's foot, they looked like charcoal tracings, unnervingly precise. Disbelief warred with rising fear. Had I tracked in tar? But the circles possessed an unnatural perfection, almost seared into the wood. My soles were clean. The bedding yielded no debris. Only the marks remained, inexplicable. A cold ripple traced my vertebrae. Goose flesh prickled my arms. I rationalized. Spilled liquid, tracked residue, turning off the light, seeking sleep that refused to come. The voice, the cadence, the bone-jarring scrape replayed endlessly, tightening my jaw. Dawn arrived, leaving me hollowed out. Tension knotted my shoulders. A dull ache pulsed behind my eyes. Circling the bed, I examined the floor. The marks persisted, stark against the lighter grain. A damp cloth proved futile. They refused to yield. The smell, however, had dissipated, leaving only the phantom scent of char. Unease clung to me, like a shroud, as I prepared coffee, the night having offered no true respite. Work beckoned, demanding I compartmentalize the strangeness. A hurried shower, clothing donned, the lock clicked shut. Throughout the day at the office, my focus fractured. My supervisor's query regarding a project met a vacant stare. Later, I found myself drumming my pen against the desk, the rhythm uncannily echoing the cyclical phrases from the dream. The recognition struck with physical force. The pen clattered from my grasp. I sat immobile, staring at the scarred laminate, a constriction tightening my chest. Returning home that evening, I was met by a lingering, unnatural warmth. The apartment felt significantly hotter than the mild air outside, despite the windows remaining slightly ajar. My steps led me instinctively to the end table. The effigy sat there, its carved eyes seemingly fixed upon me with a heightened, malevolent intensity. My throat constricted. The impulse to discard it then and there surged, yet I faltered. Just an odd piece of rock, I insisted silently. But that night, the nightmares redoubled their assault. The same voice chanted its cryptic litany, the vibrations resonating now within my very ribcage. My limbs lay leaden in the dream state, movement impossible. The grinding of stone escalated, a deafening cacophony that filled my ears, forcing my teeth together until my jaw screamed in protest. I snapped awake, drenched in sweat, heart hammering. The sheets were sodden. The pervasive stench of ash saturated the bedroom air. Sitting bolt upright, gasping, I fumbled for the lamp. More dark sigils marred the floor. Not just scattered rings now, but clusters of them, each circle an inch or two across. Nausea churned within me. Panic spun threads of ice through my veins. I scrambled out of bed, pacing, each footfall unsteady on the marked wood. My mouth felt like parchment. In the bathroom, splashing water on my face, my reflection stared back, eyes bloodshot, skin clammy. Calm remained elusive, drowned out by the echoes of the voice, the memory of the heat, the presence of the effigy. I retreated to the living room. It rested precisely where I'd left it. Approaching, I lifted it, holding it under the lamp's glare. The stone pulsed with warmth against my skin. The intricate grooves surrounding the eyes appeared subtly deeper, sharper. I rotated it, searching the base for any inscription, finding only more of the rough, dark material. Setting it down, I retrieved a refuse sack from the kitchen and thrust the effigy inside. My intent was the dumpster behind the building, but as I pulled open my apartment door, a blast of furnace-like heat billowed out from within, pushing against me. The hallway beyond was cool, normal. Behind me, the living room felt incendiary. My shirt instantly clung. Pushing through the thermal wall, I descended to the alley, heaved the sack into the metal bin. Taking a breath burned my throat, as if I'd inhaled pure scorch. Back inside, the apartment still felt overwarm, but the oppressive weight had lessened. I threw open every window, inviting the night air. Restlessness kept me pacing before I collapsed onto the sofa, scrolling numbly through my phone, seeking distraction that never came. Around midnight, exhaustion claimed me. I lay staring at the ceiling for what felt like an eternity before sleep finally took hold. Later, how much later, I couldn't say. I jolted awake. My phone displayed 3:12 a.m. The heat had returned, ferocious, suffocating. I flung the blankets off. My t-shirt was plastered to my skin. Swinging my legs over the side of the bed, my foot collided with something small and solid near the doorway. In the pre-dawn gloom, I could discern only a dark shape on the floor. A wave of cold dread washed over me. My hand found the lamp switch. There it lay, on its side, the effigy. The newspaper wrapping was gone, vanished. A faint, acrid smell of burnt paper tinged the air. My hand began to shake uncontrollably. My pulse hammered in my ears. For several seconds, paralysis held me fast. Then crouching, I reached out. The stone was hot, searingly so, like baked earth under a relentless sun. I forced my fingers to close around it. My thoughts scattered like frightened birds. I knew I had thrown it away. Its presence here defied all logic. The urge to drop it, to flee the apartment, was overwhelming, yet my legs felt rooted, impossibly heavy. Clutching the malevolent object in my trembling hand, I navigated back to the living room. The dark circles on the floor had proliferated, sprawling across the planks in bizarre, unsettling constellations. No voice sounded now, but the thick, expectant silence felt infinitely more menacing. My own breathing roared in my ears. Closing my eyes momentarily, I fought for equilibrium. Simple disposal wasn't enough. I fetched an old towel, swaddled the effigy tightly, then shoved the bundle into a plastic grocery bag. Keys snatched, jeans and jacket thrown on over my sweat-soaked shirt, I fled the apartment. The stairwell felt cavernous, amplifying my echoing footsteps. Outside, the crisp night air was a shock against my fevered skin. I made straight for my car. Driving out of the city, away from the familiar streets, my objective was remoteness, a place to sever this connection. My knuckles shone white, clamped around the steering wheel. Each glance towards the passenger seat brought a spike of terror, the half expectation of seeing the effigy unwrapped, its obsidian eyes fixed on me. It remained contained. The rearview mirror became an obsession, reflecting only empty road and my own paranoia. An hour or so bled away before I found it, a lonely stretch of highway arching over a shallow moonlit creek. I pulled onto the shoulder, engine ticking. My heart thudded painfully as I exited the car, grabbing the bagged object. Scrambling down the embankment, loose soil shifting underfoot, I reached the water's edge. Wading in, the icy shock soaking through my shoes was almost welcome. With a surge of desperate strength, I hurled the bag into the sluggish current, watching it bob and drift slowly downstream, eventually swallowed by the shadows. A profound wave of relief washed through me, loosening the rigid knots in my shoulders. Dawn was painting the eastern sky with the bruised purples and faint golds as I returned home. Exhaustion gnawed at me, yet stepping back into my apartment revealed a distinct change. It was cooler, the air lighter, blessedly normal. I locked the door, sank onto the sofa, and consciously willed the tension to drain from my limbs. Soon after, I stumbled to bed and fell into a deep, dreamless slumber. For the remainder of that day, a fragile hope warred with residual tremors of fear. I cleaned obsessively, airing out the apartment, scrutinizing every inch of the floor. The burn marks remained, indelible scars, but crucially, no new ones had appeared. The ashen stench had finally faded entirely. Mundane chores, laundry, dishes, vacuuming, became anchors, activities to occupy hands and mind. As night fell again, anxiety coiled in my stomach. Lying in bed, I strained my ears against the familiar hum of the refrigerator, listening for the scrape, the voice. Silence. I drifted off near midnight and slept undisturbed. Waking felt like surfacing from a great depth, more rested than I had been in days. The ache in my back lingered, but the pervasive sense of dread had receded. Work was manageable, devoid of dissociative episodes or phantom rhythms. Returning home, the empty space on the end table was a quiet confirmation. No sign of the effigy. A long, slow exhale escaped me, perhaps the first genuine breath of relief in what felt like an age. A ghost of a smile touched my lips. In the ensuing days, vigilance became habit. Each morning involved a ritualistic check, under the bed, behind furniture, inside closets. The apartment's temperature remained stable. The last vestiges of the ash smell vanished. The dark circles on the floor became part of the landscape, unchanging, unspreading. Sleep improved, though sudden awakenings still occurred, heart pounding from dream echoes. One afternoon, drawn by a morbid curiosity, I revisited the antique shop. It was shuttered, windows crudely boarded over. A stark sign declared it permanently closed. Peering through a crack between the planks revealed only impenetrable darkness within. A familiar unease prickled my skin as I lingered, then turned and walked away. Weeks have now passed. The nightmares have not returned. My apartment breathes normally, though the scorched rings remain a constant visual reminder underfoot. I've considered sanding, refinishing the floor, but a superstitious reluctance stays my hand. A fear of disturbing something best left dormant. It's an irrational thought, perhaps, but potent nonetheless. The voice, the grinding, are confined to memory. My sleep is blessedly quiet. Sometimes I wake sweating, recalling the effigy's radiating heat, only to realize it's merely the weight of my blankets. Whether that object is truly gone, inert, or simply biding its time elsewhere, I cannot know. For now, life has reassumed its mundane shape. Work deadlines loom. The apartment feels cramped. My neighbor's coffee continues its olfactory assault on the hallway. These ordinary frustrations are strangely welcome, preferable alternatives to the terror. Thinking of the effigy still causes my hands to clench, my pulse to quicken. The image of those vast grooved eyes, the sensation of the stone, unnervingly warm, alive in my grasp. These things remain vivid. Explanation eludes me. and I no longer seek it. This isn't a tale for casual sharing. Laughter or panicked belief feel equally unhelpful. It remains my solitary burden. Sometimes, late at night, the old compulsion surfaces, and I rise to check the living room. My gaze confirms the empty end table. My bare foot traces the familiar contours of the burn marks on the floor. Then, drawing a steadying breath, I return to bed, telling myself, it's over. For now, I am free. But forgetting is impossible. The weight in my hand, the scorching heat crawling up my arm, the grinding sound that vibrated in my bones, the voice chanting its alien litany, the suffocating smell of ash. They are indelible. Yet, so too is the memory of relief. Watching that cursed thing drift away into the darkness of the creek. That memory is my anchor, enough to grant sleep, even as a sliver of awareness remains perpetually alert, listening for a knock from the wrong side of the wall, watching for a new scorch mark upon the floor. Should that day arrive, I will face it. Until then, I endure, and that is sufficient.